I woke up at 5 in the morning to the sound of my snow blower struggling against what had to be at least 2 feet of fresh powder, and I knew instantly that today was going to test every ounce of patience I had left. The February storm had hit Buffalo, New York harder than the weatherman predicted, and my driveway looked like someone had dumped half of Lake Erie on it in frozen form. I'm Ryan Whitmore, and I've lived in the Meadowbrook Hills subdivision for 3 years now, which means I've survived 3 winters of dealing with our homeowners association president, Deborah Cunningham, who has made it her personal mission to make my life as difficult as humanly possible. The snow chute on my blower was working overtime, sending arcs of white powder in a perfect trajectory over my front lawn and onto the designated snow pile area that the HOA had grudgingly approved after last year's blizzard nearly caused a riot at the monthly meeting. I was making good progress, already halfway through the driveway, when I noticed something that made my blood pressure spike faster than the wind chill could drop the temperature. Deborah had parked her silver Lexus SUV directly in the path of my snow chute, positioned at such a precise angle that there was no way it was accidental. The vehicle sat at the edge of her property line, which technically bordered the easement where my snow was supposed to go, and she stood on her front porch in a purple parka that looked expensive enough to fund a small country's defense budget, holding a steaming mug and watching me with the kind of smile that suggested she had been waiting for this exact moment since the storm started. "Good morning, Ryan," she called out, her voice saccharine, sweet, and dripping with false concern. "I hope my car isn't in your way." I had to park it there, because the HOA regulations clearly state that all vehicles must be positioned at least 15 feet from the primary structure during severe weather events for emergency vehicle access. I shut off the snow blower and pulled my hood back, even though the cold immediately started biting at my ears. "Deborah, that's not a real rule and you know it. You're blocking my snow chute." "Am I?" She took a delicate sip of whatever overpriced coffee she was drinking. "I wasn't aware that your convenience took precedence over HOA safety regulations. Perhaps you should review the bylaws. Section 47, subsection 12, paragraph 3. I had reviewed the bylaws multiple times. Usually at 2 in the morning when Deborah had sent me yet another violation notice for something ridiculous like having my trash cans visible from the street for more than 4 hours or planting flowers that were apparently not on the approved vegetation list. There was no section 47, subsection 12, paragraph 3, because the bylaws only went up to section 32, and that last section was about pool maintenance for a community pool that didn't even exist. "Move your car, Deborah." "I don't think I will. In fact, I'm going to need you to redirect your snow removal activities. The easement area is currently under review by the Architectural Committee, and until we've completed our assessment, all modifications to the landscape, including temporary snow displacement, need to be approved in writing." My hands were freezing. My back was already sore from pushing the heavy blower through dense snow, and I had to be at work in 3 hours at the auto repair shop I managed downtown. I didn't have time for Deborah's power games, but I also knew from experience that engaging with her only made things worse. She fed on conflict like a vampire fed on blood, except vampires were probably more reasonable and definitely better dressed. "Fine," I said, restarting the blower. "I'll figure something out." I redirected the chute toward my own front yard, which meant I'd have to shovel out the massive pile later, but at least I could finish clearing the driveway. Deborah watched for another few minutes, clearly disappointed that I hadn't given her the satisfaction of an argument, before heading back inside her pristine colonial-style house that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread for homes of insufferable people. By the time I finished the driveway, my front yard looked like a miniature mountain range, and I was running late. I took a quick shower, dressed in my work clothes, and headed out, making a mental note to deal with the snow pile that evening. The roads were barely passable, and the drive to work took twice as long as usual, giving me plenty of time to stew over Deborah's latest stunt. My coworker Miguel was already at the shop when I arrived, working on rotating the tires on a Ford F-150 that had seen better days. "You look like you're ready to murder someone," he observed, not looking up from the lug nuts he was loosening. Deborah struck again. "What was it this time? Did she measure your grass and find it a 16th of an inch too tall, blocked my snow chute with her car? Made up some fake regulation about it." Miguel whistled low. "Man, why don't you just move? That woman is going to give you a heart attack before you're 40. I'm 34, and I bought that house fair and square. I'm not letting some power-hungry HOA president run me out of my own home. Stubborn pride is going to be what they put on your tombstone." He wasn't wrong, but I had invested everything into that house. After my divorce 2 years ago, I needed a fresh start, and Meadowbrook Hills had seemed perfect on paper. Good schools in the area, even though I didn't have kids. Quiet neighborhood. Reasonable property taxes. What the real estate agent had failed to mention was that Deborah Cunningham had been HOA president for 7 years and treated the position like she was running a small, authoritarian regime. The day passed in a blur of oil changes, brake replacements, and one particularly nasty transmission issue that took Miguel and me 4 hours to diagnose. By the time I got home, it was already dark, and the temperature had dropped to somewhere around 10 degrees. The snow pile in my front yard had frozen solid, creating an impressive monument to Deborah's petness. I was standing in my driveway, contemplating whether I had the energy to deal with it tonight, when my neighbor Eddie walked over. Eddie Patterson was retired military, somewhere in his 60s, and one of the few people in the neighborhood who wasn't afraid of Deborah. "Saw what happened this morning," he said, his breath coming out in white puffs. "That woman is something else. That's one way to put it. You know, she did the same thing to the Hendersons last year. Kept blocking their snow removal until they had to hire a professional service, and then she cited them for having commercial vehicles in the neighborhood during non-approved hours. What happened to them? They moved. Couldn't take it anymore." I felt a surge of anger that had been building all day finally reach its breaking point. "I'm not moving." Eddie nodded approvingly. "Good. Someone needs to stand up to her, but be careful. Deborah doesn't like losing, and she's got the entire HOA board in her pocket." After Eddie headed back to his house, I went inside and made myself dinner, but I couldn't stop thinking about the situation. Deborah had been making my life difficult for 3 years, and I'd always taken the high road, always tried to comply with her endless stream of regulations and requirements, most of which she made up on the spot. But there was something about this morning, about the smug satisfaction on her face as she watched me struggle, that pushed me past my limit. I spent the next 2 hours on my computer, pulling up weather reports and checking the forecast. Another storm was coming in tomorrow night, a big one. The meteorologists were predicting anywhere from 18 to 30 inches of snow, with high winds and near whiteout conditions. It was the kind of storm that made national news and shut down entire cities. An idea started forming in my mind, probably not a good idea, definitely not a mature idea, but an idea nonetheless. I pulled up the property survey for my house and Deborah's, studying the exact boundaries and measurements. Then I checked the HOA bylaws again, reading through every single section until my eyes burned. That's when I found it. Section 28, Paragraph 7. All property owners are responsible for maintaining clear and safe conditions on their property during winter weather events. This includes, but is not limited to, removing snow and ice from all walkways, driveways, and outdoor structures within 24 hours of snow accumulation ceasing. Outdoor structures. That included patio furniture. I looked out my back window at Deborah's yard. Her entire patio was elaborately furnished with an expensive outdoor dining set, complete with 8 chairs, 2 lounge chairs, a side table, and what looked like a very pricey outdoor sectional sofa. She never brought any of it inside during winter, claiming that the furniture was all weather, and moving it would violate the aesthetic continuity of her outdoor living space. She'd actually put that phrase in an email once when Eddie had suggested she might want to store things in her garage during the harsh winter months. The idea crystallized into a plan. A petty, childish, absolutely perfect plan. I went to bed that night with my alarm set for 4 in the morning, and for the first time in weeks, I slept like a baby. The storm started right on schedule, rolling in around 8 the next morning. I'd called in sick to work, something I rarely did, but Miguel understood when I texted him about needing a mental health day. The snow fell fast and heavy, the kind of thick flakes that accumulated at an alarming rate. By noon, there was already a foot on the ground and the wind had picked up, creating drifts that turned the neighborhood into something out of a snow globe designed by someone with a vendetta against humanity. I watched from my window as the storm intensified throughout the afternoon. Deborah's patio furniture slowly disappeared under a blanket of white, the distinctive shapes becoming less defined as the hours passed. The Weather Service issued a blizzard warning, urging everyone to stay inside and off the roads. Perfect. By 8 that evening, the snow had stopped falling. The official measurement at the Buffalo Niagara International Airport was 26 inches, and our neighborhood had probably gotten even more than that due to lake effect. The temperature had dropped to 0, with a wind chill that made it feel like -20. Everything was frozen solid, including the massive amount of snow covering Deborah's elaborate patio setup. I waited until 11, when I was sure most of the neighborhood was asleep, before I put my plan into action. I dressed in layers, including my heaviest winter gear, and grabbed my snow blower from the garage. The machine started on the second pull, roaring to life in the quiet night. I wasn't worried about the noise. Half the neighborhood would be running their snow blowers tomorrow morning anyway, and in weather like this, sounds got muffled and distorted. I started with my own driveway, clearing it properly this time, and then moved to my front walk. The snow chute sent perfect arcs of powder exactly where I wanted it to go. Once my property was clear, I took a moment to study the layout. Deborah's patio was positioned at the back of her property, bordered by a decorative fence that was currently buried under snow. My property line ran parallel to hers, and there was a narrow stretch of what the original developer had designated as common area, basically a strip of land that belonged to the HOA and was supposed to be maintained collectively. This strip ran right along the back of both our properties. Technically, I was absolutely allowed to clear snow from common areas. It was even encouraged in the bylaws. I repositioned my snow blower and started working on the common area, methodically clearing the section that ran behind my property. The snow had to go somewhere, and naturally, it went in the direction of least resistance, which happened to be directly toward Deborah's patio. The wind was in my favor, carrying the spray of snow exactly where I wanted it. I worked for 3 hours, clearing every inch of that common area and piling snow with the precision of a sculptor creating a masterpiece. By the time I finished, Deborah's patio furniture was buried under what had to be at least 4 feet of densely packed snow. The outdoor dining table was completely invisible. The chairs were nothing but vague lumps. The expensive sectional sofa looked like a small snow drift. Even the side table had disappeared completely. The beauty of it was that it all looked completely natural. The snow had fallen, the wind had created drifts, and Deborah's patio just happened to be in the wrong place. There was no way to prove that I had deliberately buried her furniture, because I had every right to clear the common area, and where else was the snow supposed to go? I put the snow blower away, took a hot shower, and went to bed feeling more satisfied than I had in years. The next morning, I was eating breakfast when I heard the scream. It was the kind of high-pitched, outraged shriek that could probably shatter glass, and it was definitely coming from Deborah's backyard. I casually walked to my back window with my coffee mug and looked out. Deborah was standing on her back deck in her purple parka, staring at what used to be her patio with an expression of absolute horror. Her husband Gerald was next to her, a mild-mannered accountant who had long ago learned that the path of least resistance was to agree with everything Deborah said and stay out of her way whenever possible. I watched as she gestured wildly at the buried furniture, her breath coming out in angry puffs of condensation. She was yelling something, but I couldn't make out the words through the window. After a few minutes, she stormed inside, and I knew exactly what was coming next. The doorbell rang 10 minutes later. I took my time answering it, making sure to bring my coffee with me to really emphasize how relaxed and unbothered I was. Deborah stood on my front porch, her face red with either cold or rage, possibly both. "Did you do this?" "Do what?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about. My patio furniture is buried under a mountain of snow." I took a sip of coffee and looked appropriately sympathetic. "That's terrible. This storm really was something, wasn't it? I heard we got over 2 feet. Don't play dumb with me, Ryan. I know you did this. You deliberately piled snow on my furniture." "That's a pretty serious accusation, Deborah. Do you have any proof?" Her mouth opened and closed several times like a fish gasping for air. "I don't need proof. I know it was you." "Actually, according to the HOA bylaws, you do need proof before making accusations against fellow homeowners. It's in Section 19, Paragraph 4. False accusations against neighbors can result in fines of up to $500. I had made up that section completely, but I figured turnabout was fair play. That's not a real section, isn't it? Maybe you should review the bylaws. I'd hate for you to get fined for something you didn't know about. Deborah's face went from red to purple. "This isn't over. You're going to clear that snow from my furniture immediately." "I'm sorry, but I can't do that. I cleared the common area behind my property, which is not only allowed but encouraged by the HOA. What happens to the snow after it's been displaced isn't really my responsibility. Besides, according to Section 28, Paragraph 7, all property owners are responsible for maintaining clear and safe conditions on their own property. That includes removing snow from outdoor structures. You have 24 hours from when the snow stopped falling, which means you've got until about 8 tonight." I could see the exact moment when she realized I had read the bylaws more carefully than she thought. Her eyes narrowed into slits, and her voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You're going to regret this. Have a nice day, Deborah." I closed the door gently, then watched through the window as she stomped back to her house, nearly slipping on a patch of ice in the process. The rest of the day passed quietly. I actually went into work for the afternoon shift, and Miguel couldn't stop laughing when I told him what I'd done. "Man, that's cold," he said, then paused. No pun intended. She had it coming. "Oh, absolutely. But you know she's going to retaliate, right? Let her try. I've got the bylaws on my side this time. When I got home that evening, I noticed that Deborah's husband Gerald was outside with a shovel, trying to dig out the patio furniture. He'd made minimal progress, mostly because 4 feet of packed snow wasn't something you could just shovel away in an hour or two. I felt a brief pang of guilt watching him struggle, but then I remembered that he'd stood by and watched Deborah torment me and countless other neighbors for years without ever saying a word. The deadline came and went. By 8 that evening, Deborah's furniture was still buried, which meant she was technically in violation of the HOA bylaws. I decided to let it go for the moment. I'd made my point, and pushing any further would just make me as petty as she was. But Deborah wasn't done. 2 days later, I received a formal notice from the HOA. According to the letter, I was being fined $1,000 for malicious snow displacement, resulting in property damage to a fellow homeowner. The letter cited Section 41, subsection 8, which supposedly covered intentional actions designed to harm or inconvenience other residents. I read the letter 3 times, feeling my blood pressure rise with each pass. Then I did what I should have done years ago. I called a lawyer. Thomas Reynolds was a real estate attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. His office was in downtown Buffalo, and he had a reputation for being aggressive and thorough. I made an appointment for the next day during my lunch break. Reynolds was in his 50s, with gray hair and the kind of sharp eyes that suggested he didn't miss much. He listened to my story without interrupting, occasionally taking notes on a yellow legal pad. "You have a copy of the HOA bylaws?" he asked when I finished. I pulled out the printed copy I'd brought with me. He spent 20 minutes reading through it, his expression becoming increasingly amused. "This is fascinating," he said finally. "Half of these sections contradict each other and the other half are vague enough to be meaningless. Who wrote this?" "I have no idea. It was all in place when I bought the house. And this Section 41 they're citing for your fine, it doesn't exist. The bylaws only go up to Section 32. "That's what I thought." Reynolds leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the desk. "Here's the situation. Your HOA president is making up rules as she goes along, which is not legal. However, fighting this is going to cost you money and time. The question is whether you want to pursue this as a matter of principle or just pay the fine and move on." "I want to fight it." "I'm tired of being pushed around," he smiled. "Good. I like clients with backbone. Here's what we're going to do. First, I'm going to send a letter to the HOA board demanding they provide documentation for Section 41, subsection 8. When they can't produce it because it doesn't exist, I'm going to demand they rescind the fine. If they refuse, we'll take it to arbitration, which is required under your bylaws before any legal action can be taken. How much is this going to cost?" "My retainer is $3,000, which will cover the initial work. If this goes to arbitration, we'll need to discuss additional fees, but I'm confident it won't get that far. Once the board realizes they're dealing with actual legal representation, they'll back down. These HOA tyrants are used to bullying homeowners who don't know their rights." I wrote the check, hoping I wasn't making a huge mistake. Reynolds sent his letter the next day. The response came within a week, and it was exactly what he predicted. The HOA board, which consisted of Deborah and 2 other homeowners who basically rubber-stamped whatever she wanted, sent a reply claiming that Section 41 was part of the informal guidelines that had been verbally agreed upon by previous boards and were considered binding even though they weren't formally documented. Reynolds called me laughing. "This is the weakest legal argument I've seen in 20 years. They're basically admitting they made it up." He sent another letter. this time threatening legal action for harassment and demanding that the HOA not only rescind my fine, but also provide a formal apology and agree to stop creating undocumented rules. He also requested a complete audit of all fines issued in the past 5 years, suggesting that if the HOA had been inventing rules, other homeowners might have been unfairly penalized as well. That last part hit a nerve. Within 3 days, I got a call from Gerald Cunningham, Deborah's husband. His voice was quiet and strained. "Ryan, can we talk? Off the record." We met at a coffee shop in downtown Buffalo, far enough from the neighborhood that we wouldn't run into anyone we knew. Gerald looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Deborah doesn't know I'm here," he said, stirring sugar into his coffee with shaking hands. "She'd kill me if she found out." "What's going on, Gerald?" "The audit. Your lawyer requested an audit of fines, and I'm the HOA treasurer. I've been going through the records, and Ryan, it's bad. Deborah has been issuing fines for made-up violations for at least 4 years. We've collected over $60,000 in bogus fines." I nearly spit out my coffee. 60,000, maybe more. I'm still going through everything. The Hendersons alone paid almost $8,000 before they moved. The Patels paid $6,000. There are at least 15 other families who have paid significant amounts. Where did the money go? Gerald looked uncomfortable. That's the thing. It's supposed to be in the HOA general fund, used for neighborhood maintenance and improvements. But when I checked the account, there's only about $12,000 in it. So where's the other $48,000? I don't know. I'm not the one who has access to write checks. That's Deborah as president and Karen Morrison, the secretary. I can see the account balance, but I can't see the detailed transactions without going to the bank directly. Gerald, you need to go to the bank. Today. He nodded miserably. I know. I'm going this afternoon. I just wanted to give you a heads up because I think this is about to get a lot worse. He was right. The next day, I got a call from Reynolds. You're not going to believe this. Gerald Cunningham just showed up at my office with 5 years of HOA financial records. Your HOA president has been embezzling money. How much? At least $50,000, possibly more. He's still trying to track down all the transactions, but it looks like she's been writing checks to fake vendors for services that were never performed, then depositing those checks into a personal account. I sat down heavily on my couch. What happens now? Now, I contact the other homeowners who were fined and let them know they may have been victims of fraud. And Gerald needs to report this to the police. This isn't just an HOA dispute anymore. This is criminal. The next week was chaos. Reynolds reached out to every homeowner who had been fined in the past 5 years. Once people realized they'd been scammed, the anger spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. An emergency HOA meeting was called, and every single homeowner showed up. Deborah tried to maintain control, standing at the front of the community center conference room we'd rented for the meeting, but the crowd wasn't having it. Eddie Patterson was the first to speak. "Deborah, we've all seen the financial records. You've been stealing from us for years. I think it's time you resigned." "I haven't stolen anything," she snapped, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. "These are simply accounting errors. Gerald doesn't understand proper financial management." Gerald, who was sitting in the front row, stood up. He looked terrified but determined. "That's not true, Deborah. I've been to the bank. I've seen the canceled checks. You wrote checks to companies that don't exist and deposited them in an account under your name. That account is for HOA expenses that need to be processed quickly. It's a perfectly standard practice." "Then why didn't you tell anyone about it?" Reynolds asked. He was sitting next to me taking notes. And why are there ATM withdrawals and charges at luxury stores if this was an account for HOA expenses? Deborah's face went pale. I don't have to answer these accusations. This meeting is about standard HOA business, not a witch hunt. Actually, Reynolds stood up, pulling out a folder. According to your own bylaws, Section 30, any homeowner can call for a vote of no confidence in a board member if there's evidence of misconduct. I'm formally requesting that vote right now. The vote was unanimous. Every single homeowner except Deborah voted to remove her as president, along with Karen Morrison, who had apparently been helping her cover up the embezzlement. The new board, headed by Eddie Patterson, voted immediately to file a police report. The next few weeks were surreal. Police detectives came to interview me and half the neighborhood. Deborah tried to claim that she'd been using the money for neighborhood improvements that weren't documented, but when investigators asked her to provide proof of these improvements, she couldn't produce anything. The district attorney's office got involved. It turned out that Deborah had stolen closer to $70,000 over a 5-year period. The fake vendors, the luxury purchases, the cash withdrawals, it was all documented in bank records that she apparently never thought anyone would check. Deborah was arrested on a Thursday morning in March. I was leaving for work when I saw the police cars pull up to her house. She came out in handcuffs, still wearing her purple parka, screaming about how this was all a misunderstanding, and she was being persecuted for trying to maintain neighborhood standards. Gerald filed for divorce a week later. The criminal case took months to wind through the system. Deborah initially tried to fight the charges, but the evidence was overwhelming. Her lawyer eventually convinced her to take a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to embezzlement and fraud, receiving a sentence of 3 years in prison and restitution of $72,000 to the HOA. The new HOA board, led by Eddie, completely rewrote the bylaws. The new version was only 12 pages long, clearly written, and actually made sense. They eliminated about 90% of the ridiculous rules Deborah had invented, including the approved vegetation list, the trash can visibility requirements, and the mysterious regulations about vehicle positioning during snowstorms. Reynolds helped me file a claim to get back all the bogus fines I'd paid over the years. It took a while, but eventually I received a check for $4,000 plus interest. It wasn't just about the money, though. It was about the principle. The neighborhood changed after Deborah was gone. People started talking to each other again, hosting barbecues and block parties without worrying about violating some obscure HOA regulation. The Hendersons actually moved back, buying the same house they'd left, which had been on the market for months because people were wary of dealing with the HOA. As for Deborah's house, Gerald sold it while she was awaiting sentencing. A young couple with 2 kids bought it, and they were actually pleasant neighbors who didn't care where I pointed my snow chute. It was almost a year to the day after the blizzard when I ran into Gerald at the grocery store. He looked different, lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. We made awkward small talk for a moment before he said, "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For standing up to her. For not backing down. If you hadn't fought that fine, if you hadn't hired that lawyer, I probably never would have looked at those financial records. I would have just kept going along with it, too afraid to rock the boat. You're the one who brought the records to Reynolds. That took guts." He shrugged. "I should have done it years ago. I should have stood up to her a long time ago. I was just too scared." "Well, you did the right thing in the end. That's what matters." He nodded, and we parted ways. I thought about that conversation a lot over the following weeks. About how easy it is to let bullies control your life because standing up to them seems too hard, too risky. about how fear can make you complicit in things you know are wrong. The next winter brought more snow, because Buffalo winters are nothing if not consistent. But this time, when I fired up my snow blower at 5 in the morning, I could point my snow chute wherever I wanted without worrying about fake HOA violations or retaliation from a power-hungry president. I cleared my driveway, helped Eddie with his, and even cleared the common area behind my property without any drama. Miguel still jokes about the time I buried someone's patio furniture under 4 feet of snow, and honestly, I can't say I regret it. Was it petty? Absolutely. Was it immature? Definitely. But sometimes, when you've been pushed around for too long, when someone has made it their mission to make your life miserable, a little petty revenge is exactly what you need to remind yourself that you don't have to take it anymore. The important thing is that I didn't let it end there. I didn't just settle for burying her furniture and calling it even. I stood up for myself legally. I fought back against the unfair fines and made up rules, and in doing so, I helped expose a much bigger problem that was hurting everyone in the neighborhood. The last time I saw Deborah was during her sentencing hearing. Reynolds thought I should attend, along with several other homeowners who'd been victims of her embezzlement. She looked smaller somehow, diminished without her HOA president title to hide behind. When the judge asked if she had anything to say before sentencing, she gave a rambling speech about how she'd only been trying to maintain property values and keep the neighborhood beautiful, how she'd sacrificed so much of her time and energy for the community. She never once apologized. The judge wasn't impressed. In addition to the prison time and restitution, he ordered her to perform 500 hours of community service after her release, and she was permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in the state of New York. As I walked out of the courthouse that day, I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years of living in Meadowbrook Hills. Peace. The weight of constantly looking over my shoulder, of wondering what ridiculous violation notice would show up next, of dealing with someone who seemed to take pleasure in making others miserable, it was finally gone. I drove home through streets that were just starting to show signs of spring. The snow was melting, revealing brown grass and flower beds that would soon bloom with whatever plants people wanted to put there. Approved vegetation list, be damned. Kids were playing basketball in driveways without worrying about noise ordinances. Someone had painted their front door a bright red that Deborah would have had an aneurysm over, and it looked fantastic. When I pulled into my driveway, Eddie was outside washing his car, something that technically violated Deborah's old rule about water usage during non-designated hours. He waved me over. "Hey, Ryan, HOA meeting next week. We're going to vote on whether to install actual speed bumps on the main street since people keep treating it like a drag strip." "Sounds good. I'll be there." "Oh, and Sarah Mitchell is proposing we use some of the recovered funds to finally build that community pool we've got listed in the bylaws. The pool that doesn't exist, not yet, but it could. Might be nice to have something positive come out of all this mess." I agreed. It would be nice to have something that actually brought the community together instead of tearing it apart. That evening, I sat on my back deck with a beer, looking out at my yard and the common area beyond it. The snow was completely gone now, revealing grass that would need mowing soon and flower beds that I'd already started planting. I decided to plant whatever I wanted this year, maybe some bright tulips, definitely some tomatoes for a small vegetable garden. If anyone didn't like it, well, they could check the new bylaws, which said absolutely nothing about approved vegetation. My phone buzzed with a text from Miguel. "Drinks tomorrow after work. Want to hear how the sentencing went?" I texted back a yes and took another sip of beer, watching the sun set over the neighborhood. It had been a long, strange journey from that morning when Deborah blocked my snow chute to today, but I'd learned some valuable lessons along the way. I learned that standing up to bullies is hard but necessary. I learned that documentation and knowing your rights are more powerful weapons than any amount of petty revenge. I learned that there are usually other people dealing with the same problems you are, and sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to back down for everyone else to find their courage too. Most importantly, I learned that homeowners associations don't have to be nightmares run by petty tyrants. With the right people in charge, with clear rules that actually make sense, with transparency and accountability, they can actually serve their intended purpose, maintaining a community that people want to live in. Of course, I also learned that burying someone's patio furniture under 4 feet of snow is a pretty satisfying way to make a point, but I'm mature enough now to admit that probably shouldn't be the first solution to HOA problems. Probably. The new HOA board held their first official meeting the following Tuesday, and the difference was night and day. Instead of Deborah standing at the front of the room dictating policy like a monarch addressing peasants, Eddie facilitated an actual discussion. People raised concerns, offered solutions, and voted on issues democratically. It was how these things were supposed to work all along. We approved the speed bumps, which would be installed by a legitimate contractor whose business actually existed, and who would be paid with actual checks for actual work. We voted to move forward with preliminary plans for the community pool, pending a full cost analysis and another vote. We even discussed starting a neighborhood watch program, not because of Deborah's paranoid fears about property values, but because several residents had expressed genuine safety concerns about a recent uptick in package thefts. After the meeting, several neighbors approached me to thank me for fighting back against Deborah. The Patels, who had apparently paid $6,000 in bogus fines over 2 years, were particularly grateful. Mrs. Patel hugged me with tears in her eyes. "We almost left," she said. "We almost sold our house and moved because of her. This was supposed to be our dream home, where we'd raise our children and grow old, and she made it into a nightmare." "I'm glad you stayed," I told her honestly, "and I'm glad we all stood together." That was the real story, I realized. It wasn't about me burying patio furniture, or even about exposing embezzlement. It was about a community finding its voice and refusing to be intimidated anymore. Life settled into a new normal over the following months. Work at the shop was busy as always, especially with people needing vehicle maintenance after the harsh winter. Miguel and I hired an additional mechanic, a young guy fresh out of technical school who was eager to learn and didn't mind getting his hands dirty. At home, I finally felt like I could actually enjoy my house without the constant anxiety of HOA violations. I planted that vegetable garden, and my tomatoes came in beautifully that summer. I hosted a barbecue in July and invited half the neighborhood. People actually came and had a good time, and nobody worried about noise ordinances or whether the gathering had been properly approved by some committee. Eddie and his wife became good friends. We started a tradition of watching Bill's games together on Sundays, which sometimes turned into impromptu neighborhood parties when other people wandered over. It was the kind of community I'd imagined when I first bought the house, the kind of place where neighbors actually knew and liked each other. I did keep in touch with Reynolds, the lawyer. He told me that my case had actually led to several other investigations of HOA boards in the Buffalo area. Apparently, the combination of little oversight and petty people with too much power was a recipe for corruption, and I wasn't the only homeowner who'd been victimized by it. You started something, Reynolds told me during one of our follow-up meetings. State legislators are actually looking at reform legislation now, requiring more transparency and accountability for HOAs. Your case is being used as an example of what can go wrong. I wasn't sure how I felt about being a poster child for HOA reform, but if it helped other people avoid what I'd gone through, then I supposed it was worth it. The seasons changed, as they always do. Fall brought beautiful foliage and the annual neighborhood Halloween party, which was actually fun this year instead of a tense affair full of Deborah's rules about appropriate decorations and candy distribution procedures. Winter came again, and with it more snow. The first major snowstorm of the season hit in December, dropping about 18 inches overnight. I woke up early,